go. Well, hello. As Michael introduced, my name is Justin Evedon. I'm a product manager at Unchained by day, and at night, I spend a lot of time in the kitchen cooking. I spend a lot of time caring about my health and how I'm setting myself up for the future. And it's been a bit of a journey for me in coming to realize that there are a lot of things that we can do in terms of our health that we can take into our own control that are otherwise intentionally designed in our society today to be taken away from us. So I want to talk a little bit about the relationship, the parallels between Bitcoin and beef, and then I'm going to leave you all with some actionable information on how you can take sovereign control of your health. So this is a phrase that's often mentioned by Bitcoiners: don't trust, verify. Obviously, we've come to understand what that means, why it means so much. But oftentimes, Bitcoiners are not applying that to other aspects of their life. We will take for granted many other things, despite knowing that information can be manipulated and altered in a way that is not in our own best interest. We also often talk about time preference and the difference between having a high time preference and a low time preference. And this is often, I think, misconstrued by people to make the argument that a lower time preference is to be as miserly as possible today so you can have a lot of sats in the future. When in reality, the best approach to a low time preference life is to invest in yourself today so you can have an abundance of life in the future. If you can't enjoy the future with a lot of sats. And finally, health is wealth. I think that we're so hyper-focused on the Satoshis in our wallet and unable to recognize that there is an investment that needs to be made in our own bodies, our own well-being. We want to be there for our future generations to be able to enjoy time with our grandkids and the generations beyond. I'm not going to necessarily make a huge argument right now as to the health implications or the reason why beef is so healthy. There's plenty of resources out there. I strongly recommend the book Sacred Cow by Diana Rogers and Rob Wolf. They make a very compelling argument on why it is not only very healthy for you, but also environmentally friendly. Those are arguments that we can leave for another day. Suffice to say, I've just laid out a few kind of key points that at least have some relationship to Bitcoin. There are others that you can go into in terms of parallels between the two. Your custodial versus self-custodial relationship could be compared to relying on a grocery store for your beef versus having a chest freezer filled with frozen beef. Other potential parallels: KYC versus non-KYC, the provenance of your coins, grain versus grass-fed, and the differences there. I'm not going to dig into that right now. We'll save that for later on in the talk. But while there's a lot of parallels you can draw between Bitcoin and beef, I want to focus in on three fundamental pillars as to why you should invest in storing beef for yourself at home as opposed to relying on somebody else. So the first is the philosophical reason. When you connect directly with a farmer, you are establishing a decentralized peer-to-peer relationship. You are no longer beholden to the supply chains of the conglomerates, never knowing if a grocery store is going to have what you want. And as we've seen in recent years, supply chain disruptions can happen at a moment's notice. And if you are like most people, you have a freezer filled with a week's worth of food and you're constantly going to the grocery store for all of your ingredients, that can create challenges and you become far more dependent on the system. The second is the economics of it. Buying beef in bulk is way cheaper than buying it on a retail basis or even going to a steakhouse. I had the pleasure of going out with some friends last night to a steakhouse here in town. A $70 steak that was reasonably well prepared, but could have been done much better. And probably in terms of cost was less than $5 for them. So the margins are insane. And you can easily accomplish a better output at home for much cheaper. Not only that, but when farmers are selling to a large meat packing operation, they are going through an auction process. And more often than not, the amount that they earn per head is very low. I think some of the farmers I've spoken to are looking at maybe $300 to $400 per head, versus if they can find a consumer that wants to buy direct from them and buy quarters or half or wholes, they're looking at upwards of $2,000. So that is a huge swing in terms of the amount of money that they can earn. Likewise, you're able to spend much less. Oftentimes, the cost per pound is going to drop from up in the $10 to $12 per pound on average to sometimes even half of that. It's also a predictable food cost for people that are doing budgeting and trying to run their home like a business. There's less fluctuations, there's less dependence upon what is going to be presented to them at the market or at the grocery store. Finally, provenance. This comes back to the phrase at the beginning. Verifying the origin of your meat at a grocery store can be impossible. At best, they might be able to give you one or two farm names, but they don't necessarily know with certainty. They're also, for some of you may be familiar with a term called the COOL Act. It was the Country of Origin Labeling Act that was introduced in 2002, and it stipulated that any meat product, in particular beef and pork, had to have a label on it that told you where the meat originated from, what country that animal was raised in. Seems like a great idea on paper. For whatever reason, that was repealed in 2015. So that is no longer a requirement. And so in effect, they can put a piece of meat out in the grocery store, say that it is a product of the US, when in reality, that could have come from Argentina or from Uruguay or from Vietnam or wherever else, and have been packaged in the United States. That's all it needs to be done. So, long story short, economies of scale make it necessary to process meat in ways that are not ideal. They are not necessarily looking out for the consumer's best interest, they're looking out for their profit margin and their best interest. There was an article that I came across in some of the research that I was doing that went through the process of trying to figure out how many different animals comprised a single pound of beef at a grocery store. There's been a number of these articles over the years, but the estimates have ranged from anywhere from in the hundreds to upwards of 1,000 different animals that come in together in a single pound of ground beef at a grocery store. That is going to inevitably lead to cross-contamination, potential issues. The way that they're going to end up mitigating that is by fumigating it, using all sorts of gases to try and deal with it, or they're going to be filling those animals full with antibiotics as a way of mitigating potential disease. The other potential problem is that when a grocery store has meat on hand, they are going to look for ways to be able to maximize the length of time that they can sell that to a customer. In most places in the US, I think in the EU as well, you're looking at an average of about 10 days that they're allowed to keep it out refrigerated before they finally have to remove it. This is often why you'll see manager specials where they're trying to mark it down to get it moved. But there are efforts to try and extend that. And I don't know about you, but when I buy meat and I bring it home, if I leave it in the refrigerator for longer than 6 or 7 days, things start to get a little weird, and I'm not as keen on working with that kind of meat. So suffice to say, there are a lot of challenges and a lot of pitfalls that you're going to run into, and I realized in going through extensive amounts of research, trying to better understand how this process unfolded, what I needed to know in order to be confident buying meat in bulk, I realized that this was information that was very valuable to others. And so I ultimately started a Substack called the Primal Cut Sheet, where I look to aggregate a lot of this information and share it with others. And what I found is that there's a step-by-step process in terms of questions that inevitably come up for people that need to be answered along the way, and some of the roadblocks, the hurdles that need to be overcome. Oftentimes when friends of mine are starting to ask about it, or other contacts, I jokingly send this as a reminder that Bitcoin isn't the only thing that you should be keeping in cold storage. So, sorry, I'll go back so you can get a photo of that. So, what I want to do now is just run through the basics of buying in bulk. This should be relatively straightforward. I'm going to try and leave a little bit of extra time at the end for questions if they come up. There's a lot to cover, but hopefully it's pretty straightforward. So, what are the basics of buying beef in bulk? Well, there's a couple questions you need to answer early on. One, what kind of beef do you want? As I mentioned earlier, there's often a debate between grass-fed and grain-fed beef. I decided to go a little bit deeper on this because while I very much enjoy having grass-fed, grass-finished meat on occasion, I often find it a little gamey, too lean, it can dry out really easily, it's hard to work with. And I felt like it was impossible that grass-finished was the only option in terms of getting healthy meat. And what I came to discover is that the thing that you're trying to avoid more than anything is animals that have been raised at the end of their life on a feedlot. When they go from pasture for the better part of 12 to 14 months, and they get sold at auction and they get taken to a feedlot, they instantly go from a diet of 100% grass to grains with no access to fresh pasture. This shock to their system will acidify their gut and cause liver abscesses, to the point where without intervention, roughly 1 in 5 cows will have livers with significant enough liver abscesses that they are deemed unfit for human consumption. While those livers are subsequently removed, you have to wonder how that impacts the meat. And the solution that the industrial agricultural system came up with is to provide preventative antibiotics to every single animal. And that has reduced it to 1 in 10. So obviously an improvement, but still there's an issue there. 10% of those animals still are going to end up with liver abscesses, and 100% of the animals are now subsequently filled with antibiotics. Also creates issues in terms of antibiotic resistance. And what you're ultimately looking for is a farmer who wants to continue to raise these animals on pasture through the duration of their life, but introduce a supplemental feed. Often people will argue that grains are an unnatural part of an animal's diet, but if you were to allow for an animal to graze naturally throughout wherever it is that they may roam, in the summer and the fall, they're going to be encountering grains that are naturally coming up, and they're going to be eating those. So the primary issue here is ultimately coming back to the provenance and being able to verify how this animal is being raised. Again, very difficult to do in a grocery store. The next question you're going to ask yourself is, how much should I buy, right? If you are a single person living in an apartment and all you have is a 4 or 5 cubic foot freezer that sits atop your refrigerator, and you are consuming, half a pound 3-4 times a week, you may not need a full beef share. Ideally, when you buy in bulk, you're going to want to work through that reasonably well in 6 to 12 months. That meat can last longer than that, but the quality is going to start to drop off. The nutrition's still going to be there. I ended up putting together a little bit of a cheat sheet on how much you might want to purchase based on your consumption patterns. I've got ranges here in large part because a grass-finished animal is going to be on the lower end of that range. It's just a smaller animal, hasn't put on as much intramuscular fat. But more often than not, rough estimate, an eighth or a quarter beef is going to be great for one person. A half beef, I've got a household of 4, 3 currently consuming beef. The other one's too young to be eating beef, although that will be happening soon enough. And we go through probably a half beef every 6 months or so. The next question to ask, how do I find the farmers? How do I find the ranchers? Where am I going to connect with them? If you're in a city, you might feel removed from the rural landscape around you, but more often than not, there are farmers markets, which are a great starting point for connecting with farmers that are coming to town that are going to give you an opportunity to try a little bit at first. That can also ultimately lead to building longer-term relationships. Or you can go online. There's directories for most states where you can find farmers that are in your area. You can cold call them. This is something that I did once I realized that I had a very specific type of farm practice that I wanted to source from. And you can just start asking them questions, how do you raise your animals? How do you feed them? How long are they on pasture? How far do they need to be transported in order to be slaughtered? What butcher do you work with? All these things, they're going to be happy to provide answers for, because ultimately they're looking for a customer and they want to give you those answers. And they actually care about getting more customers that are interested in their practices. More often than not, farmers are very proud of what it is that they do. If they're not proud of what they do, if they're not interested in telling you more about it or having you come out to visit the farm, it's probably not a good sign. Places like this are going to be all over the place. It's a great opportunity to connect with them, talk with them. Chances are, if they're at a farmer's market, they're interested in talking. If they're not, again, move on. The next big challenge, once you've found your farmer that you want to work with, you've decided on how much you want to purchase, this is really the crux of the issue, and one of the reasons why I coined the term primal cut sheet. The cut sheet is the language that you speak with the butcher. This is once you have committed to an animal, it ends up at the slaughter, the butcher is going to reach out and is going to say, I have you down for getting a half beef or a quarter beef. Here's a sheet I need you to fill out, send it back to me. Sometimes they're going to be more than happy to jump on a phone call with you and walk you through it, but if they're doing a large enough operation where let's say they've got 40 or 50 animals that they're processing on a weekly basis, and there's at least 2 or 3 clients per head, that's a lot of individual calls to make, and that's going to take up a lot of time. And they're often not going to be that interested in trying to help you maximize the amount of stuff that you get. I ended up putting this up a little bit too small, but this is an example of what a cut sheet looks like on the right side. It is a foreign language. When I first started looking at this, I didn't understand what the difference was between a cross rib and an arm roast, or why I wanted to tell them the thickness or the roast cut size. There's a lot that needs to be deciphered there. And what you don't know to ask for oftentimes is going to be left out. When I got my first half beef a number of years ago, I didn't get any fat. It just wasn't mentioned on the cut sheet. And I didn't realize until I went and ordered the next time, and I was working with a different butcher, that fat was listed on there, and I ended up with a box of 30 pounds of fat. And so being able to maximize what it is that is being provided by these farmers is ultimately the most efficient and the best way for us to do the honorable thing, to honor the animal that we have slaughtered for our consumption. So being able to navigate that cut sheet is really important, and the faster that you can understand and decipher that, the more pleasant the butcher is going to be, and subsequently the more likely he is to do a decent job of doing the work for you. So that's kind of the summary here. There's a lot more that can go into it. Obviously, you can end up with a chest freezer filled with ribeyes, and that would be wonderful, but realistically, when you get a half cow, it's not all ribeyes. And you need to then be able to figure out, what am I gonna do with all this meat? So that's the next evolution of what I'm gonna be working on over the coming years, is helping people better understand how to maximize the use of all these different cuts, how to be able to work with things that you wouldn't have otherwise had. You go to a grocery store, you're not, unless you're Billy, you're not gonna be buying shanks. And a lot of people, that's usually one of the biggest hangups. How am I going to end up cooking all of these awkward cuts that I'm gonna be working with? So, to bring it full circle, this is an opportunity to take back control over yet another thing in your life that our large agricultural systems have tried to claw away from us. It allows for you to create a deeper connection with your neighbors, with farmers, and to ensure that they have reliable customers that are willing to pay them the fair market value of the work that they have done. And it is not only in your best interest, but it is in everyone's best interest to buy beef directly from a farmer, to buy beef in bulk. The incentives are aligned, much like the network. You have nodes, you have miners, there's an incentive alignment there. And so I want to leave you with this thought. As you continue to move forward with your evolution in learning about beef and getting more comfortable with the idea of explaining to your girlfriend why you have bought a 9 cubic foot chest freezer to put in the living room, you want to always and forever keep in mind that the correct number of chest freezers to have is one more than you currently own. Never a bad idea. So that's it for now. I'm happy to leave it open to questions. I figure there's probably going to be a number of them, but thank you very much.
Sure, it's money printing that's done it, but we're blew way past the all-time high on cattle here.
The number of cattle, the number of head that we have?
No, the price per.
Oh, the price.
Price per
yeah.
truck, right? 50,000 pound live feeder or 40,000 pound feeder cattle are at all-time record-breaking highs. So it's sort of expensive to be a real carnivore. You know anything about the market? You know what's going on? I mean, if there's an attack on beef in our life, then you would think the price would be going down.
Yeah, I think there's definitely been an increase in the cost of inputs for a lot of feedlot operations. They are heavily dependent upon grains, and as those prices tick up, that's going to increase the price of beef. It's also just, as inflation number go up, everything is going to end up costing more. It's going to continue to drive forward. So buying in bulk is kind of like buying futures, assuming the price of beef is going to go up, and giving yourself an opportunity to lock in those low prices, people, right? If you are comfortable with going to Costco and figuring out if they are sourcing from a decent place, which they're probably not, and seeing those prices, fluctuate between $15 and $20 a pound for a ribeye steak, or you can have a half dozen ribeyes at the ready in your chest freezer and have paid an average of $6 a pound. That seems like a better option. So as those prices continue to go up, this is an opportunity to just bring that overall cost down.
You mentioned with the grass-fed beef that it can be gamey and stuff. I implore you to check out different sources and not just like blanket grass-fed beef tastes not as good as grain. because there's some amazing grass-fed beef out there, just tastes incredible. So it's not always the case.
Sorry, what is it that didn't taste, or that tasted great? Grass-fed.
Yeah. Not all of it tastes gamey. There is some grass-fed beef that does taste gamey, but
Yep.
if you get the right type and the right breed, it's fantastic.
Yeah, a lot of it depends upon. I should clarify. I'm not looking to denigrate grass-finished meat. It is going to be healthier. It's going to end up costing a lot more per pound. My challenge was I didn't feel like it was always necessarily worth that premium cost. I do know that there are some producers who will raise their animals for upwards of 3 years. And that at a roughly, this is a quote that I remember hearing from the folks that run Holy Cow Beef, where after about 30 months, the animal has put on kind of they've grown to their maximum size, and for the rest of the time, they continue to develop fat stores. And so you can end up with a product that has enough of the marbling to kind of balance things out while never having consumed supplemental grains that were introduced elsewhere. But oftentimes, depending on the types of cover crops that are being grown in a fully grass-fed operation, they end up being a close approximation of grains. And so there isn't, a one-size-fits-all. I think that was kind of my ultimate takeaway, is that there's more nuance to it. You can't just simply say that because there were grains that were involved that it's going to be bad or unhealthy. The goal is to move away from the feedlot operations that are objectively causing further malnourishment, sickness, and leading to poor quality. Yeah. Over here.
And it's the first time I realized, the commodity market is extremely manipulated. So, I now foresee a similar thing coming to beef. How high is the price of beef going to go?
Trying to understand the markets and how those prices have been fluctuating is kind of out of my wheelhouse. I have definitely found that if you are able to work directly with a farmer, you're going to remove some of those challenges. They're still going to have some increases overall, but yeah, being less reliant upon the overall market to determine how that's unfolding, being a reliable customer for a farmer is going to incentivize them to keep you as a recurring customer, and is going to give them an opportunity to provide you with, as an example, the farmer I get most of my beef from, if he has any cuts where the vacuum seal has broken a little bit and he's not going to be able to sell those at retail price, he will run those by me, give me a discount. They're still great, right? Just because the vacuum seal has busted doesn't mean it's going to suddenly be bad to eat. It's just that it's not going to last as long in the freezer without losing quality. So again, building those relationships with farmers directly not only is going to give them incentive to want to keep you around as a customer, but if the proverbial shit does hit the fan, you're likely the first person that they're going to reach out to and give you effectively first right of refusal. Yeah. Up front. You can probably talk loud enough.
Real quick, do you potentially offer any services where people could reach out to you and you could help walk them through buying a cow, especially when they have a cut sheet, and save them a ton of time, hypothetically?
Thank you for the planted question, Billy. So as part of Primal Cut Sheet, I do offer the opportunity to jump on a call with you if you are just wanting to better understand some of the specific questions that you have for buying beef in bulk, or if you've committed to an animal, you've gotten a cut sheet, and you just want help walking through it, making sure that you're getting the most out of it. That's something that I'm more than happy to jump on a call with you about. There's been a couple of instances where people have ended up with effectively an extra 50, 60 pounds of usable product that they would have otherwise lost out on. Building confidence in the ability to get your money's worth and then to be able to use it properly. We're over time, Billy. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Grandpa, why do you have so much Bitcoin?
Well, it all started in the year 2023 when I attended a conference called BitBlockBoom.
What's BitBlockBoom, Grandpa?
It was a conference where people talked about Bitcoin. This was way back when we used something called the US dollar for money.
What? Bitcoin wasn't always the world's money?
If it weren't for great speakers at BitBlockBoom like Jimmy Song, Adam Curry, and Preston Pish, we'd all be living in pods and eating bugs. Instead, I was able to avoid fiat enslavement and secure generational wealth.
F***ing legend.
Be the legend your grandchildren deserve. Experience the best Bitcoin conference out there and join the Bitcoin revolution. BitBlockBoom, the only conference for true Bitcoin maximalists. Book your tickets today at bitblockboom.com and use the code BBB1 for a special discount.